My presentation was called the behavioural revolution. The argument there was that there is a revolution happening in other sectors in terms of a shift towards using behavioural science, or at least looking at organisational challenges in terms of challenges of human behaviour. It's going on in other sectors. It's coming to the social housing sector. All my work for the last 2 years has been exclusively within the social housing sector, so it's already happening in terms of how we can apply what we know from the behavioural sciences, and in terms of what our challenges might look like if we interpret them as challenges of human behaviour rather than as more generically as a challenge of culture, or as a challenge of recruitment, or as a challenge of systems and processes. There's two reasons why it's important, especially within the social housing sector. Ultimately, we're dealing with real people's lives here. We have a massive opportunity to impact some of the most vulnerable members of our society. So in terms of the behaviour change we seek to bring about being positive, then yes, let's use whatever we can to affect positive behaviour change that impacts on the health, well-being, financial health, etc. Of the residents we serve. That's from the residents' perspective. From the organisation's point of view, then obviously these are very straitened times. We're all under pressure to do more with less, to do better with less. And a lot of the work that we do distills the problem down to its source, and then in a lot of cases actually uses relatively low cost or even cost neutral interventions to impact on those behaviours. What we've been talking about today is the opportunity to make very small changes, cost-effective changes to the way we're already doing things, to have a disproportionately large impact. We've done a lot of work around income collection and rent arrears. We're currently working also around channel shift, so how we can encourage tenants to self-serve, normally digitally, around gas safety access, and around universal credit transitions. So obviously if you think about rent arrears and universal credit as an example, it shows how a behavioural approach can work for both the tenant and the organisation. Tenants don't want to be in arrears, just exacerbates an already hard-pressed situation. So if there's things that we can do to help enable or empower a resident such that they don't fall into arrears as a result of transitioning to universal credit, for instance, then that's great for them. Similarly, it preserves the revenue stream for the organisation, reduces the amount of costs that it incurs to recover a debt. So some of these approaches that we've applied in the context of arrears, we've seen double-figure increases in rent payments, double-figure increases in rent payment values, we've seen greater tenant engagement, and we've seen tenants more able to stick to their repayment agreements once they have fallen behind with their rent. Not everything that we've tried has worked, but that speaks to the second kind of side of this coin, is use the behavioural science to inform what we design, but then test the interventions very rigorously to work out whether or not it works. The key step on the journey, and it's often the hardest step on the journey, is to translate the challenge that you're facing into a behavioural challenge. And the organisations that I work with, that's the thing that they struggle most, actually distilling this. Okay, we've got an issue with culture. What does that mean in terms of an individual behaviour? That's a very difficult transition to make. So that would definitely be the first and most important step. Once that is done, immerse yourself in the behavioural literature. Obviously, the social psychology that sits behind some of these things may be technical at the academic end, but there has just been an influx of popular, accessible literature around behavioural economics, social psychology more generally, prospect theory, game theory, all these things that have been made readily accessible to the general reader. So translate your challenge into a behavioural one, throw yourself into the behavioural literature, and then make sure you're testing what you do rigorously.